right. Yeah, so just what I was just mentioning about Google joining the Universal Stylus Initiative. If you didn't know that was a thing. So I'm hoping for some sort of, I was saying iPad Pro competitor from them, but we'll see. All right, so we're gonna talk about Firebase today. And just a couple of things about myself real quick. My name is Bryan Gintz. I'll put my email and stuff up at the end. I started developing Android apps probably about 4 or 5 years ago for fun. And then that apparently qualified me to be the Android lead at my job. So I became the Android lead at my job. And when Project Fi came out about 3 years ago or so, it was in beta. They had a pretty tight-knit community that was really, really involved, and they had a lot of people that had questions about how to see different information about their phones and different stuff like that. So as my first project, I was like, this ought to be fun. I'm going to try this, and create a little app called Fi Spy at the time, and put it out there, and it gained quite a bit of popularity, mostly because it's a pretty tight-knit niche community, and there was no competitors. So at that time, it kind of accelerated that. So that really encouraged me just to do app development, which I was very, very fortunate to have such a great launching off point in that. Now, at that time, Firebase wasn't available, so everything I did was kind of homegrown and thrown together and all that sort of stuff. And since then, I've changed the name to Signal Spy because Google's legal department is much bigger than mine, and when they sent me a cease and desist to use the word Fi, I stopped. And there's also been at least one competitor for the app that's out there. So it's a really I basically fell in love with not just developing apps. I've been a developer, mostly PHP, web backend stuff, but the app piece let me kind of experience almost everything about creating an app or creating software, all the way from planning to actually interacting with end users. Most of the jobs that I've had, I've been somewhere slotted in there, but never been able to actually experience the entire piece of it. So being able to develop apps and pushing them out there and letting users use them and interacting with those users was kind of the thing that hooked me. So last summer I quit my job and started doing this full time. I have a couple other apps I'll show in a little bit and throughout the talk here that I'm trying to get to have as much momentum. But Firebase really is a really big reason why I was even able to say or had the guts to say, like, I'm going to give this a shot, because so much of the business around app development is a lot of the little things that we take for granted when we're usually just doing software development, or we're just doing product management, or we're doing UX design. We don't have to worry about the full scope of that. And Firebase brought all of that together to where almost all of the development of an app can be done through Firebase. So real quick, how many people have used Firebase before? Okay. How many people have developed an app, either an iOS app or Android app, personally, and put it in the store? Something for you or for a business that you own? Or okay. How about done an app that's been in a store through an employer? Okay. So about a third of us. Now, how many would have an app idea that they would love to see in the store if they could just figure out all the different pieces of it? Okay, so a few more hands there. So I think you guys are my target audience, if nothing else, to say it is really possible to do with Firebase, especially with some of the tools and some of the libraries and the things that people have brought to make it easier. But there's still definitely challenges and things like that. So let's jump in real quick and do a quick high-level overview of Firebase. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and log in. So Firebase is, I don't know what the name of the company that created it, but in 2016, Google bought Firebase, and they incorporated that into I think their cloud services, and since then they've been kind of like cramming different things onto it. They bought Fabric from Twitter, I think last year, and are now in the process of trying to incorporate all of that stuff. And it's great. I mean, they're doing a really good job of it. I think it would be very difficult to pull in all these different services together. They seem to be doing a really good job of it, because things like Digits, which was Fabric's of Twitter's phone verification. They pulled into the Firebase authentication and verification piece. Crashlytics, which actually I think Twitter bought from somebody else, is a great tool for managing and monitoring crashes of your apps. And they pulled that into Firebase, and now are kind of creating this cohesive system. So I don't know. I don't suspect that Firebase is going to have a big impact at I/O. Maybe it will. I think it was really big last year, especially because they just bought it from they bought that and then also acquired the Twitter one. So, but there are a lot of different things going on in here. I somewhat foolishly, I decided, you know what, the best thing to do this talk is going to be to actually create an app and then show, since it's recent and fresh in my memory, what it looks like to create that app through Firebase. So as often I do, my eyes are much bigger than my ability. So I have part of an app that's mostly working for some things that I created this week for this. So the church I go to, we're on the west side, and we're going to add a library there, and trying to encourage kids or young adults and stuff to start reading. So one of the things we wanted to do, or one of the things I thought I could do to add to that, was create something where the kids were able to, or just people were able to kind of like tell each other what they're reading, and kind of create these little book clubs and things like that. So so I created a funnily named app called Read, RWEAD, which nobody knows exactly how to say it. Most of the people say it like weed, which is read with a speech impediment, or weed without the R. But either way, it's just pronounced read. And what I did is I set this up and I went through and said, okay, which of these pieces can I add to this? And wanted to show you guys that stuff. So I'm gonna do a quick high-level overview of all these different pieces, and then we're gonna jump into some code. And I'm gonna stop throughout a couple different times to ask if there's any questions. Again, I don't know if there's anyone that could be an expert at every piece of this. I've probably touched on 90% of these at some time, and really feel like know a lot about probably 40 to 50% of them. So there's probably, you guys probably know more, you guys that have used this know more about some of this than I have. So if there's questions or comments, just get my attention or something and chime in. So to that end, any questions or anything before I move on? Okay. So they break it out in these 4 different parts here: develop, stability, analytics, and grow. And you can see how Google's really positioning this as kind of the app developer's helper to create a lot of use around this service. Now, before we go any further in this, I'll just talk to Google's not doing this out of the kindness of their heart. This does cost money. There is a free tier, and for most of your pet projects, your free tier will be fine. And they just announced it goes from a free tier to a pay for usage, just pay for whatever you're using, to like kind of an enterprise-y type high-level tier. And they just announced that if you ever went to the paid version, you went straight from free to paid and started paying right away. They didn't include the free version as part of the first part of the paid one. They just changed that last week or 2 weeks ago. So now some of the things in here you won't be able to use, like Test Lab and things, unless you have the paid version, which is the Blaze plan. But you can set that up and put your billing in, and you'll only pay once you hit the threshold of what was free, which is really great. It wasn't the case before. So the thing to think about when you're considering Firebase for setting up an app or using it is that you pay for everything. It's very similar to AWS in that instance, that it's great for scalability. You can create a small app that gets really big, and this is going to handle all that stuff as far as the architecture and the hardware of it. But they charge you for everything. They charge you for storage. They charge you for data in, data out, etc. So there's a big advantage to kind of pre-planning, especially if you think what you're going to do is going to have some traffic or a lot of storage or things like that, of how you want to use that. So I'm not going to go in depth about the billing stuff, but there's quite a lot of different articles, and there's different pieces that'll say, use this database over that one, depending on what type of use case you're using. So the develop piece is, again, mostly for the developers of us, and this is the stuff that's really, really nice. Authentication is going to take care of setting up your app to be able to authenticate and make sure that your users, if you're going to have a public facing section and a private facing section, or if you want users to persist certain data, keep profiles, store that sort of stuff. So for the Read app, what we're doing is we're storing users' profile, we're storing which books they're reading, what the progress of that book is, and if they're part of any groups. So that information, we don't want to just store it on people's devices, because if they uninstall or clear the data, that stuff's gone and they lose it. So we're going to persist that into a different part of this in the Firestore database that I'll show later. But it's really nice because on the back end of it, all of your authentication pieces can hook into the database piece and combine those. Those aren't automatically combined though. You get an ID with your authentication, and then you have to store the data in the database and make that connection together. I would suspect at some point they're going to connect that, but right now it's manual. The different sign-in methods that they have available are email and password, phone, Google. They just added play games, Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, and then anonymous usage. So anonymous usage is basically you can set it up to where you're actually able to track your users and see demographic information, publicly accessible information, but you don't have any private information for them. So that helps with some of the different analytics we'll see later, is you can basically just say, even if it's a public facing, there's no sign-in, it still may be worth using authentication because you can get that information, and if you are storing it locally, there's a very easy way to convert an anonymous user into a signed-in user. So all that stuff comes for free in the authentication. There's methods for all that, great documentation on it. The database, there's two different flavors of database. They started off with a real-time database, and then they added this cloud Firestore. They were promoting it before as two different solutions with two different use cases, but I just this week when I was looking, I saw that they renamed Cloud Firestore to the next generation of the real-time database, which makes me think they're going to be getting rid of the original one at some point. But both of these are going to be JSON based. I don't know if that's correct. They're flat. They're flat storage. It's not relational. And if you're like me and you come from like doing a ton of MySQL and relational database to this, it is painful to figure out how to convert not the data per se, but your mindset to that. So if you're looking to create an app with this, and you're going to need to store data, and you've not worked with a flat architecture for a database like this, and I don't know, what are some other ones? Mongo's like that, right? What are some other ones that are popular? Couch? Okay. Anything like that. If you haven't thought of that, think about it beforehand. Don't get discouraged. You will figure it out. But again, if you're like me, it might take you a little while, and you'll bang your head against the table quite a few times. But the Firestore database is a lot better than the real-time database, mostly in terms of querying. So if you're going to be doing a lot of high traffic stuff, like maybe like a chat app or something like that, the real-time database piece might make sense because they charge in terms of data passed back and forth, whereas the Firestore charges in terms of the number of transactions you have. So that's one consideration when you're looking at the two of those. Again, I'll be interested if they phase one of these out, though. Storage is just a way to. This is cloud storage. This is probably one of the most ubiquitous Google Cloud things that people have used before. It's just a place to store your information. There's great APIs for all of your popular languages in here. Again, though, I mean, it's worth considering depending on what you're doing. Even though it'd be nice from a programming standpoint to store everything there, you're going to be paying for it. Signal Spy has very, very low usage when it comes to like transferring data or anything between the user and me. The only thing is we store some information when somebody signs up to support it at a certain level or things like that. I had a $5 a month DigitalOcean server that was the back end for this. When Firebase came out with a real-time database, I was like, oh, I'm just going to try this. The next month I had a $195 bill from the same amount of data because with DigitalOcean I wasn't really paying attention to how much was actually being transferred, and I was wasting a ton. So I mean, it was a huge waste on my part, but it was free. It was $5 a month. But and then when then Google also figured out that they weren't charging for the data transfer for the overhead for SSL. So then they said, oh, by the way, we're going to start charging for that. they tell you about 2 weeks after I got my first $350 bill. So, needless to say, I'm a little bit more hesitant to use things like storage, just unless I really, really need to, or I know that the model of it, the financial model of it, makes sense. So, but it's a great place to store things if you need to. And again, like everything else, it hooks in nicely to the back end. Hosting is just what it says here. It's just a way to host a static website. So you can do it on your local machine, and it gives you command line tools to then deploy it out to the web. And you can see I set up gdg.read.com, which then I just did the basic deploy, puts it out there with SSL, everything else, with whatever you want to put in there. So it's really nice if you just got a static website and you want to put it out there with some basic information. Then you don't have to mess with setting up a server, or unless it's really what you want to do, playing around with all the WYSIWYG, different systems that are out there. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for high-end sites unless you really research it. I haven't used it a lot for that. But has anyone used the hosting for like client-rich applications or single-page applications, anything like that? Okay. Yeah, I'm not even sure what is possible there, which was a bummer because even with Firebase, because it was missing that functionality to write some smart JavaScript helper tools, you still had to use a server somewhere because there was things like sending email, or if you're going to use a texting service, things like that Firebase didn't offer, that you still have to interact with something. Until about 6 months ago or so, they added this new functions. So this again is just their cloud functions from a lot of the stuff is just from the Google Cloud, repackaged as Firebase. But this is a really nice tool, basically, where you can write a Node backend for I believe it's Node, for really anything you want to do. And they're basically, they get deployed as endpoints for each individual function that you write. So I just wrote two quick little functions in here. One that is it's just called Test API, which is just an HTTP endpoint where when you send in a request, it takes it and it writes it to the database. You can set that however you want, and then use all the different tools that are available through NPM to hook into whatever else you might have. This other one here, it's easy to see this. This other one here is they also give you quite a bit of direct functionality into the different tools of Firebase. So this one right here is actually a watcher of sorts on my database. So it's watching anytime there's an update to a particular endpoint on the database, it will fire this function and perform whatever I want it to perform. So on one of my other apps called Library, what happens is it looks for anytime there's a new loan triggered. Library is an app that you keep track of things you're loaning to your friends, and it messages back and forth and reminds, so you don't have to tell them like, hey, where's my power saw or whatever. What it does is it watches that when a loan gets added and says, okay, I'm going to go ahead and take care of all the communication here. So when that happens, I'm going to send a text, or I'm going to send an email, or I'm going to send a push notification, so that the app itself is not having to do all that stuff. It all happens on the server, and I don't actually have to trigger it outside of what I'm already doing by just having the app save this information locally, because it's watching for that, and then it knows to take these different functions. So there's a number of other things you can do. You can watch for different things in storage. You can monitor events. When we get to analytics, you can say, if you see a certain number of events, send off an email to somebody. It's really limitless as far as how involved you want to get with that. And it's nice because it's just these little package functions. You don't have to worry about setting up a server. You don't have to worry about pointing a URL to it. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It all comes just by going in there, writing a JavaScript function, and then deploying it. Okay, Crashlytics. Crashlytics is, like I mentioned, it's just a crash tool. It's not a crash tool. It is a crash monitoring tool that will give you basically just information about your app and either crashes that happen that you weren't planning, or you can also monitor particular error events that you are planning or planning for. And then it gives you basically some stack traces and things like that from those. And there's a lot of, I've not used it to its fullest, but there's a lot of extra stuff you can do to really send a ton of information to help you narrow down particular things. Down to the point where if you have an app that's logged in, you can append the user's record, their information, to the crash log. So if you see a particular crash, you can proactively reach out to your users and say, hey, if it wouldn't creep them out, like I see your app is crashing and let me take care of it for you. Or even better, if they email in and say I'm having a problem, you don't have to chase that problem down. If any of you guys have done that, it's terrible. It's not happening for me. How often have you said that? So you're able to actually go in and see what's happening on the back end. So really, really powerful tool. Not super sexy and interesting, but very, very helpful if you need it. I work with Elias back there, and we have this in a production app for a client, and it's something that we do after every release. We say, hey, let's look on Fabric or Crashlytics and see what's in there, make sure nothing is going out of control. And it's a great tool for me to go back to the client and say everything looks good. Before it was just kind of like you just kind of put your finger out there, it seems okay. But now you can actually have something where you can monitor and say, we've seen a 3% crash, but these 3% crashes are only happening on devices older than 4.4, and most likely it's because of this. So you can give a lot of really good information about what's going on. Performance is fairly new. It gives you some stuff out of the gate of how long it takes for your app to start, how long is it, what's its performance in the foreground and what's in the background, and then you can create your own traces. I actually find what's in the Google Play console as far as performance is a lot more helpful than this particular thing. The nice thing about this, though, is, and I should have said this in the beginning, one of the nice things about Firebase is it's not just an app creation tool as you might think of it if you're an Android developer, a web developer, an iOS developer. It's all of those things. And most of their tools are going to work with all those different technologies. So it's almost, Firebase is almost like a business in a box if you think about it. If you want to deploy not just an app, but you want to put something out there and you want to see it, you want to see a web version of it, you want to see an iOS version of it, etc. I'd actually hoped to write the demo app in React Native, except for one problem. I don't know React Native. So I hope to learn that and put that in there at some point. But Test Lab is a very interesting concept. I met the product manager of this at a Google conference a couple years ago, and they basically just bought a company from somebody that just had one of these warehouses with thousands and thousands of phones, hooked in. I don't know if you've seen those pictures. Usually it's mining cryptocurrency or something, But this was before that, where it's actually they used it to run all these different tests. So this is just a tool that's really, really nice if you spend the time to utilize it by writing tests. I've found as a software developer that you can save a lot of time by not writing tests, but that also can cause a lot of problems. So I don't advocate it necessarily, but one of the great things too, at least for Android, is that with Android Studio 3, they now package a test recorder. So you can just basically open up your app and open up this test recorder, and it's not great, it's not magic necessarily, but it makes getting some UI tests a lot easier than when you just had to kind of dig in and figure it out for yourself. So what you can do is with those tests, or if you just want to drag and drop your APK and have it run a random test, you can run it through these. When you publish something to the to the Play Store, it runs a very basic version of this, and will send you back like, hey, we ran your app update through the thing, and it'll tell if you have errors or not. So I've actually, most of the time it comes up green for me. That's because my errors don't get caught by that, not because I don't have errors. But a couple times it's come back red, and it says, oh, okay, let me go check it out. And I saw that, I left some stray code in there or something. So those two things, develop and stability, are mostly developer-oriented, and kind of to replace the different tools you might be using now or the roll your own tools that you might be using. The rest of this, analytics and grow, are more around kind of the business side. So I'm going to pause there real quick and see if there's any questions or thoughts or etc.
Have you ever exported the Crashlytics to another
No, not through that. I mean, I've used more than that. We've done some Jenkins testing that will export to SonarQube, which I think is something that kind of takes all those different error reports and pulls them together, but not live from the users. I don't know. It would be interesting to see. And maybe if we have time towards the end, we can look. But the functions might actually have a thing that triggers when you get a Crashlytics log. So rather than exporting, you might be able just to hook in and say, when I get a particular Crashlytics report of some sort, then fire off, to my other system or something like that. I would not be surprised if they added that in there. But yeah, I've never actually exported. I don't think one of the downsides of Crashlytics and Firebase is they removed quite a bit of functionality from what Fabric had. I wouldn't be surprised if they re-implement it, but they really kind of stripped it down to its barest form and then started to add some more things to it. So I think you can still use Crashlytics and Fabric, which might have some more functionality for that, though. Any other questions? No? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna breeze through these next ones, and then we'll jump into some code. So analytics, I'm going to switch over to something that actually has some analytics here. So this is the Signal Spy app. You get a lot of stuff for free, meaning just events that when you just include the library, it will fire off those events automatically for you. But a lot of what happens in here, a lot of analytics I've found, are particular to what somebody wants to see, you, your boss, your client, that sort of thing. Sometimes when that's the case, you'll need to go in and create your own events. It's pretty particular. Firebase is pretty particular as far as how it is required to set those up. And once you set them up, they're only good for that point forward. They don't retroactively work. There's not a great query tool in here either, but you can hook it up to BigQuery, and then you go from tiny to enormously complicated. Or at least that's how I look at BigQuery. But so there's no real happy middle ground for these. But if you could identify, again, going kind of, plugging the functions piece, if you could identify particular reports you wanted, you could also just kind of siphon off those particular events as they come in through functions. So, this just gives you your typical analytics, monthly users, weekly users, your daily users, and then shows you your trends. Unfortunately, my trend is down. And then it also gives you users that are active in the last 30 minutes, which this is pretty interesting. Depending on the app, Signal Spy is a very kind of boring app as far as what people are doing with it. So you don't get a lot of information. But if your app was something like social or had to do with people sharing with each other or that sort of thing, you could glean a lot more, I think, exciting information from that than what's in here. So here's an example, this daily user engagement. Here's an example where the more work you put into this, the better it comes out for you. You can put in here the different pages or areas, whatever you want to call it, that the different screens that the users are going to, and details about those screens, and it will give you a pretty good chart of how they interact with the app. Mine, unfortunately, is just kind of all clumped under the main activity, so you can see 99.72% of people visit that. There's more to it than that. I haven't set up the granularity to report on that. It would be very interesting. And one thing, if you want to create an app for financial reasons, there are a lot of tools in here that can help you optimize that stuff. I kind of scoffed at the idea of growth as a department until I worked with some of those guys, and they're really, really good at what they do. And there are things that you can do to little tiny changes or little things that you can monitor that you can have a pretty big impact on the bottom line. So things like this analytics piece and all the different stuff that we're not going to go into could be very helpful for that. Unfortunately, for me, it's one of the things I have not really paid a bunch of attention to, and I wish I had. So if you love that stuff and want an interesting case study of trying to fix some bad analytics, talk to me afterwards, and I've got a fun project for you. So yeah, events, audiences, attribution, funnels, cohorts, those are just different methods to measuring the same thing. Is anyone here kind of a growth-oriented person? I don't want to offend anybody. 'cause it's all kind of the same thing to me. So, but I'm sure it's very, very challenging, and there's a lot of science to that. But we're gonna skip through that stuff. So the stream view, this kind of goes back to what we were looking at with the number of active users in the last 30 minutes. So this is cool because you get to kind of see a picture of who's using your app. And it kind of pulls that back. When I said earlier that using Firebase kind of invigorated me to want to do this as a business, getting connected with the people that are actually using it is one of the biggest levers for me. It's one of the biggest rewards that I get out of doing this because I have someone, as odd as it is, email me and tell me how much they love the app. I don't even use the app. I'm not, my feelings are not hurt when people don't use the app. I don't use it that much, but when people say they really like it and really enjoy it, and then they actually will buy it or they donate to support the development, all these different things, connecting with your users in that way is very, very rewarding. So this kind of gives you a picture of that, and then you also get to see some. If you track particular events, you can kind of watch those event streams for a particular user. So this is somebody in Los Angeles on a Nexus 6P that has viewed some screens recently. Let's see. Yeah, there's no. Oh, okay, you can see it's the home screen. So again, interesting stuff. Not particularly helpful for my use case, but for yours it might be. Latest release is something new, so let's all look at this for the first time together. Okay, yeah. So this is really helpful. This gives you a picture of your last release and how many people are using it. One of the things when you're releasing apps, especially if you're doing a fix or some sort of big feature or something, is your analytics are kind of, there's a big question mark over a period of time. Like, oh, I'm seeing a big spike in something. Is that because the old users or the new users, and where are we at between getting people onboarded? It appears as if this is the tool to solve that problem. Debug view, this is really helpful. So a lot of the stats from Firebase are 24-ish hours delayed. They're not real time, which is kind of a bummer. Now the stream view, things like that are, but you don't. That just gives you a picture of those people. You don't get any aggregate views. So the debug view is helpful if you're actually trying to debug a particular thing, especially when it comes to events and things like that. You can hook it up to your phone. You have to enable something through ADB, and then all of your events on your particular device are going to be immediate and real time. So you'll see all that. You don't have to wait 24 hours to try to figure out something you might be working on. User properties, those are things that you can add yourself if you want to track particular things about your users. Now, one of the things that I hope that they fix is how you have user properties here, and then you have your authentication up there. They aren't tied one-to-one together, but they are tied together, but not like you would want them to. And then in addition to that, if you're storing your users in one of your databases, there still can be some. You can end up kind of managing 3 different profiles, or at least 3 different areas with different data. They still can connect. So that's just something to keep in mind. The other thing about user properties to keep in mind too is that while events are continuing, someone will register events, a user property does not keep track of anything historical. So it's always just whatever they are right now. If you change it, that's what they are now too. So if you need to keep track of the history of your users, you should keep that somewhere else. All right, under growth, you got predictions. This is newish. This has a few things, again, that come out for free. And another one that I have not utilized that I'd like to. I'm not really sure how. But it comes and goes based on their how confident Google is that this is true. So what this is telling me is that 28% of my users, 5,000 users, are targeted to delete the app in the next 30 days. Is that right? Whatever it is, you can actually target these users with either remote config, which we'll look at in a minute, or notifications. So if you can come up with a plan that's like, hey, when Google is basing, and I trust Google's algorithms better than the ones I can come up with in my head. If they're saying that these people are going to churn, and there's an opportunity for me to say, hey, here's a freebie, or here's a tip, or to reach out like, hey, if you need support, email me, or something like that. Then you can target these people and possibly lower that churn. The other ones, you get the churn and not churn for free, and then the spend and not spend, if you have any in-app purchases, are also for free. You'll notice that these two are, have a number and have this target user button available. If there's not enough confidence, or if they don't know, they'll just gray it out. Like when I checked earlier this week, this one was grayed out. So it kind of comes and goes as far as how accurate it is. I have not used this yet, but I look forward to figuring out how to use it. So with Signal Spy, it's interesting. I'm actually trying to prepare a release of it fairly shortly here. But every 30 days, I have roughly about 3,000 people that install it, and then roughly about 2,700 that uninstall it. So, so from a monetary standpoint, for me, that's a big chunk of people that uninstall the app every month. That if I can, capture 10% of those, or even 1% of those, it has actual gain. So these tools are really helpful when you're going through that stuff. Notifications is a way to send push notifications from this console. I'm not a big fan of this personally. I've used it and had a lot of people complain about it because it was targeting people that shouldn't have been targeting, and I thought I was doing it right, but I wasn't. So if you don't have a volatile user base, or they're used to getting push notifications, it's a great tool. If they're not, or they're very finicky, then I would be wary of this, or just be really sure that you know what you're doing with that. Remote config is just a way to, there's two values for remote config. One is that you can set up configurations that are preset in the application that you can just switch through here. So you can turn on, let's say you have an app that you want to show different backgrounds for the seasons or something like that. You don't have to hard code it in. You can put it in here, and then you just make the change in one place, and it propagates out to all your users. I mean, everything with Firebase is push. So everything, you can set it up differently, but everything it gets pushed out to the users. The other thing you can do with this is A/B test. So once you have a remote config, you can use that to say the button's blue or the button's red, and I would like to say 50% of my users see blue and 50% see red. Based on that, which ones are more likely to not churn or something like that. All of that is available through this. Dynamic links, I just used this for the first time this week. I'm not sure what the difference really between this and deep linking is, except for that maybe this just plugs in more deeply to all the analytics stuff. So, but both deep linking, which isn't through here, but is Google's got a bunch of documentation on it, and this dynamic links is just a way for you to create links that are smart enough to know if your user has the app installed, it'll take them into the app. If it doesn't, it'll take them to the App Store. If they're on an iPhone, it'll take them to the iPhone store or the Apple Store. If they're on the web, it'll take them to a particular base on the web. So you can really kind of target people really well with that and allow your app to interact and track things. AdMob is ads. We all love ads. So you can add your AdMob through Firebase now instead of using the Google Play services, and it'll kind of link into the rest of your dashboard. I put Signal Spy, or I put ads into Signal Spy, and it makes about a whopping like $3 a day or so in ads. So unless you've got a ton of traffic, it might not be worth it to do it. But if you're thinking of putting an app in, it's a great motivator. I mean, when I put Signal Spy out for in the beginning, it was free. There was no cost, and I put ads in. I mean, immediately I had people saying, "Where can I give you money to get rid of the ads?" So I mean, and the lifetime value of someone paying for the lowest amount that you can put in Google Play, which is $1. I mean, it would take depending on your app. I mean, with Signal Spy, it would take I think I figured like 2 years to earn the equivalent in ads, in ad revenue from somebody. So those things do make a difference and are worth planning. Okay. So we are at 7:30. Are there any about just kind of the overview of all this stuff? And that was maybe a little bit more in depth than an overview. But again, the point of this, I mean, the documentation on all this stuff is excellent. The ability to see examples, the ability to debug these. Stack Overflow is your friend. there is just a great amount. Let's just look real quick at one of the documentation pieces if you haven't seen it. So I mean, even from the beginning, they really target, what are you using this for? They give you all these different options: Android, iOS, Web, C++, Unity, and admin, which is essentially just, this is admin on all these different ones is where you want to go if you're using the cloud functions. That's the admin functionality is what you use to interact with all that stuff. Since it's yours, you don't need to authenticate as a user per se. So it gives you just a great information step by step on all these. Most of them are up to date. The code labs and some of the examples are out of date, so be wary of those a little bit. Even inside, and I just saw this today for the first time, even inside Android Studio, which is going to take a minute to come up, but there is a plugin where you can kind of just click, 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 and it'll add a bunch of that stuff to your project already. So I would definitely recommend reading through the documentations. The videos are okay. But they're probably more along the lines of what I spent the first half an hour going over, is just like, what is this and why do you want to use it? They do get into code to some degree, but these examples are a lot more helpful. The other thing that I would recommend is Firebase UI. So Firebase UI is I'm not sure where it originated. But Google either endorses it or took it over or something, as evidenced by their branding of it at this point. What this is some helper libraries that kind of package even up the easier stuff of Firebase into even easier to use libraries for this. So and the nice thing about this, and it's a little frustrating in some regards, but I emailed one of the developers about an issue I was having. I said, I really like to see this. And they said, yeah, that'd be great. We want to do it. Actually, we have it ready, but it's not ready in iOS yet. And they said that whoever the originator or Google or whoever is very particular about keeping all the UI libraries in sync. So you never have one particular library that's way out than the other. The nice thing about that is you can look at it and say, again, I want to do an iOS, I want to do an Android app and a web app. And you can be guaranteed that even though the feature set might be a little bit less than if one of those was ahead, you can create a common application through all of those things. So they give you Firebase Auth, Firestore, and storage, and the Firebase Auth piece is probably the nicest one, because you can literally just pop a piece of code in there, trigger it with a button click, and it will take you through a whole authentication flow. I think you did this at the developer conference, right? Yeah. Yeah. So I'm super easy to put in there, very clear. I'm not even sure. Have they added anything to it since you talked?
I don't think so. I actually didn't know that they had the Firestore one, so that's cool.
Yes, yeah, that's fairly new with the Firestore piece. They were working ahead. I guess they knew it was going to happen. This team did. They were working ahead. It was a little bit after Firestore came out. But the nice thing about the Firestore one too is that it comes with a recycler view adapter that's kind of like built in. So you basically just write a Firebase or Firestore query. You pass it in there. You tell what class is going to return, and then you can pop that into an adapter. So it comes with all the pagination and all that sort of stuff. Again, when I say for free, I mean for cheap. Meaning that you still have to put some work into it. In fact, that was one of the things that's why I came right at the last minute, is I couldn't get that particular piece working in the demo app. So let me take a minute here and show what this looks like while I'm setting this up. Any questions? My wife texted me. I don't know what she said, so hang on. Did I do this? Okay. I was going to show you. Sorry, I'm going to bounce around again real quick here. So when you're in here, you can add when you're in Android Studio, you can add. I think it comes automatic now. You get the Firebase piece. It asks you to log in, and then it basically has either instructions or helper tools to actually integrate all of these different pieces into your app. remote config, test lab, crash reporting, app indexing, admob, etc. So that's really nice. I actually use that for a couple of the things. Okay, let me build this real quick. So, who's done native Android development? Okay, so some of this might be not super helpful, but basically most of what I wrote for this just comes from these libraries. A big chunk of them are just the Firebase core ones, and then some of the Firebase UI stuff, and a couple other helper libraries. While I'm waiting for Gradle to build. How about React Native developers? What do we have? None? Oh, man.
Like, what is it?
Yeah.
I haven't released anything.
I think I see a lot of potential with that. I mean, that's my hope is to convert some, if not all, my apps to that. Just from the idea that even though it's not like you don't write one app and then deploy it in 3 different places, a lot of your logic can be shared between those. That's at least the promise of React Native or React and React Native, and then integrating that into Firebase, which there's not a Firebase UI library from the same team that is for React Native, but there are a couple different libraries that other people have written and maintained that will let you use Firebase UI, Firebase with the UI stuff built in for both React and React Native. Oh, perfect. Crashed. Okay. Well, now you can see interesting. Okay. Well, the nice thing is this would those crashes will show up in Crashlytics. Now we don't want to wait 24 hours to see them, but okay. So let's just pull open. Who wants to see the code? Anybody want to see the code? Okay, there's enough of you. Okay. I didn't want to bore you if you did not want to see the code. Now, I've only been doing Android for a few years, and the last job I did before that was in college. So for you purists out there, this is going to horrify you. So don't be scared. It works, though. Well, I say that. And it crashes again. All right. All right. So the first thing that I'm doing here, is that readable? Yeah. The first thing that we're doing is basically just initializing the Firebase tools, and the main one is Firebase auth. So after including the library into the Gradle side, all you need to do to initialize it, and you don't even necessarily need to set it to an object that's available. You can use the singleton or this guy Firebase auth.get instance, and then you're able to see, okay, do we have an authenticated user or not? And at this point, if I do not have an authenticated user, what I do is I'm showing a signed out view, and then I give a login button. So you guys can't see that, can you? Okay. Bear with me. Okay, so here's our logged out view. We just see a little logged in button. So I'm able to tell the state of the user by saying hey, Firebase, is this person authenticated or not? So it gives me a very easy kind of Boolean to in my app either allow certain things or not allow certain things. And that stays up to date. So whether you can also set listeners on it, so you can have it push that out. Or if you use something like RxJava or other more reactive programming, you can hook into that stuff a lot easier. Or you can just go and say, hey, do I have an authenticated user, and treat the user accordingly. All right, so I clicked login. At this point, I only have one. What are they called? Handler set up, Google. But excuse me. If you set up multiple users, the next page is going to be a kind of a choice. Golly. A choice screen. Do you want to log in with Twitter? Do you want to log in with Facebook? Do you want to log in with GitHub? Or you can skip the automated screens if you want to build your own login screen. But again, just to get something out the door, what's nice is you can go in and you can see right here, I've got just Google set up. You can say email, phone, Facebook, Twitter. You can put all those things in. For some of those, like Facebook and Twitter, you have to add their libraries and put in your keys. But once you do that, it's all available. There's the Firebase UI team has done a pretty good job of theming it. So you give your colors, you give your color themes, typical material design stuff, and it will theme that fine. I don't know what it looks like on iOS, but I assume, like other things that I've seen, it's from Google, so it's really going to push material design hard even on iOS, which, depending on how you feel about that, is maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing. Okay, so it pulls this up. I've got these different accounts on here, so I'm going to choose my personal one, and then I'm going to log in. So it refreshes the page and says, hey, do you have an authenticated user? Oh, you do. Show the logged in area. Here's the home view. I was hoping to have a lot more, but all you get is a box that says home view. But imagine a bunch of really cool stuff in here. Profile page is crashing, so we will not look at that. But that at this point, we get photo, name, and email from Google. So you get those, again, when you use that authenticator. You get different information from different ones, but they all kind of normalize to what Firebase Auth considers display name, phone, email, and then you can get the particular provider and any extra information from them. But again, if you choose to, in this example, I then persist that to the database, now I'm tracking my user record based on my data. So if they go into their Google account and change their photo, while I have access to that, it's not automatically tied in. So that's something to keep in mind, is that with all these different authenticators, and I think depending on your use case, it makes sense to store it yourself, because you may have people coming in from 3 or 4 different areas. You may have one particular person that comes in through 3 or 4 different areas, and you want to link those accounts together. So you kind of want to keep it abstracted out a little bit for that particular data. Okay, so once we get in here, all of this stuff, so this is just the typical stubbed view for bottom navigation from Android Studio. I just created that out of there, added in some different categories, one for books, one for groups. Groups is not done either. The idea of here is, though, you would go in and you would be able to click on this and add a group and then invite people to groups. The books piece is a little bit more finished, so this was a little bit more fun. But so in here, this is where the list. Hey, it's showing up now. Well, this will be interesting. Okay. It shows no books if there's no books. Now, when I add a book, it should show a book in there. We'll see if it actually does. But at this point, what I'm doing is I'm using a barcode reader with a really, really bad API to search for books. I had like 8 books on my desk, and this was one of the only ones that actually had information for. Oddly enough, called Getting Things Done, which I did not get this done. So you can put the ISBN in, and you get the book information. It pulls all that in. That's all standard Android stuff. None of that is particular to Firebase, but a couple different things you could do, depending on if you had this. Say you had this information stored on a server somewhere. You could then instead of making this call to an external API, you could hook it up to your cloud functions, or you could even do something like offload a bunch of the processing work to cloud functions while you're doing some of the minimal stuff here. cost-wise, it's much more advantageous, depending on what you're doing, to have your users spin the data. So one of the reasons I did this is because I want whoever's using this, I want them to use their 2K, which isn't going to bother them, as opposed to having 100,000 people using that. All of a sudden, that cost is going to, not that I would have 100,000 people using this, but that cost would definitely come back to you guys or to us. So at this point, then you set up the information, how many pages in this book, and you can add the book. And it should be showing up in here, but it's not. So the recycler view for the Firebase UI, all I was doing at this point was saying go to I do not want Slack open. That would be a nightmare. Go into my database. This is Signal Spy. For read. And go into the books section and look for any book that has the owner of my ID. So this is my ID, GMD, et cetera, and it's going to pull that list. So you'll have to trust me, it is actually pulling that list in here. It's just not showing up for some reason. But this is, again, if you come from MySQL, you have a lot of tools that you can, kind of peruse the data and query the data and stuff manually. This gives you a very rudimentary way to look at the data in here, but unfortunately, doesn't give you something. And I don't know if there's tools. Has anyone used any third-party tools to actually look through this data? Use something like, let's see, the pancake one, as my daughter calls it. What's the SQL Pro or Heidi SQL? These different tools. Is there anybody know anything about for Firebase? No. Hey, GDG project. Let's do it and we'll all get rich. So it's a little bit tedious to do this, but the nice thing is it's pretty easy to write these queries in your app and just view the output that way. I think the authentication of the database were really the big pieces that I wanted to go into code-wise. I'll show you how it's pulling in the query real quick. So it's just this piece right here. It's saying get my database instance. So Firestore does alternating collections, documents, collections, documents, collections, documents. So you always have to go in that order. And a collection is going to store a bunch of documents. A document can have sub-collections, but a document can't have sub-documents. The document does have a pretty extensive structure of what you can set up, including objects as one of the elements in there. So it's pretty, while being inside of a collection or being inside of a document allows it to be queried a little bit easier through the standard methods, just for storage, you basically have everything you need to store the stuff in there. So we're doing a collection of books, and we're looking for any documents that have an owner set to my query key. And then I'm ordering by the title. Very, very important. Whenever you're doing anything Firebase, a lot of the methods that they give you in the examples do not include the override for errors. Always put the override for error in. I spent about an hour today trying to figure out why I wasn't pulling anything up. And it's because in Firestore, whenever you do a query, you have to click a link that only shows up in an exception to go and create an index on that. And until that index is created, it won't actually query your data. So I'm sitting there saying, I know there's data in there, and it was only until I changed the query to actually just output an exception and output an error that it said, hey, you need an index, here's this button. It's terrible. I mean, they should do something else. They should have some notification somewhere else, but they don't. So make sure you always override the error handlers and report those and see that stuff. Otherwise, you'll be spending a lot of time on that stuff too. Okay. I think that is enough, unless we have particular questions or thoughts or anything anyone wants to see more of. One of the things I really did not have access to when I was learning all this stuff is someone that did know how to do it. So even though I'm definitely not an expert, I want to be available to you guys if this is something you want to play with and you want to ask questions. I may not be able to get back to you quickly. I may not be able to answer your questions, but I'm certainly would love to be a resource, at least to point you in the right direction or to something like that. So, so I'll put my information up here, and if you have any questions on this, or you have any questions on code, or if you just want to talk about an idea you have or something like that, and is it possible? I'm a firm believer in small app being able to provide income. I quit my job for it. I've yet to get there, but but I believe it's going to happen. The business model that I'm working off of is 5 to 10 small apps that make a medium amount, $10,000 to $20,000 a year that can fund a small development house. So I believe all the pieces are there, especially with Firebase. And for me, it started off as a weekend hobby, using with a Signal Spy app, and 130,000 downloads later, it's a full-time job. So the biggest takeaway would be that if this is something you want to do, now is as good of time as any to get started with it, because there's so much available to get it off the ground, and I would love to help you with it. So, any questions?
On the analytics there, did it have export for not necessarily the data, but at least reports? Like the preprint for the executive sales?
No. Elias, have you seen actually any sort of printing or anything from those? Elias spends a lot of time in there. Okay, yeah, I haven't seen that, and I'm suspecting that it is not, because they make such a big deal of exporting it to BigQuery. And actually, if you work at a place that has the budget, there's some really, really cool analytics tools where you take something like BigQuery and you just dump this giant bunch of information, and it comes up with really, really neat stuff. Again, it's like magic to me, but the simple stuff, or the reports you see there, I've not seen anything where you can even just print it. Maybe just print it as you see it.
Boardroom meetings and what the pictures.
Yeah, which is unfortunate, because it doesn't seem that hard, but
I guess you mentioned your business model, and also the pricing, and also mentioned earlier your price scare earlier. So are you thinking that this is actually going to help you out and actually save money or make that profitable for you?
So using something like Firebase from a purely comparison with other tools that you could get for free using the same thing, if you're looking at those individually, Firebase is going to be more expensive, I think, on most of those things. But when you look at the fact of how much time it takes to find those tools and find the experts and figure out what they do and then pull them all together, then that's really where your savings comes in. And again, long term, if any of my apps take off and become something hugely successful, one of the first things I'm going to do is say, okay, what does the scale cost of this look like? Because at some point there's a tipping point where you say, okay, I'm making enough money that I can investigate what architecture makes the most sense. But you're never going to get there unless you can get all the pieces in there. Firebase lets you get all the pieces in there for a fairly low cost, both in terms of time and money. Anything else?
Have you played around with the rules on the database?
Not as much as I should. No. I've done a little bit of that, but not a ton. I want to say that I've seen something recently that made it seem a lot easier.
It's very awkward the last time I used it, just going like, okay, you can just trying to assign rules to different levels of the hierarchy in the flat file, the flat table.
It's weird because it's basically a JSON file, so you don't think but you have access to your live information too in that JSON file, which is not intuitive, I don't think. But has anybody else done a lot with permissions?
Somewhat. It's very complicated. You can do a whole talk just on the permissions.
Yeah.
It's pretty in-depth.
Yeah. So, but what's funny is it's programmatic. It's written programmatically. You'd think that there'd be a tool or something you could write that would help you at least expose some of the convoluted stuff.
Or just basic rules of like, hey, I just want to implement some basic rules. No, like it's default is everything's wide open, and other than that, you're on your own.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's one of the downsides of, and I'm not sure how some of those other databases work with their permissions, but one of the downsides of Firebase being fairly newish, at least as far as its exposure as it comes from Google, is that there's not a lot of good, Medium articles or YouTube videos or whatever about that. But I would suspect that there are probably even more than the last time I looked. So there is a Firebase Slack thing that's from Firebase. I have not gotten any value out of it. So try it at your own risk. But I've asked some questions in there, but and I've tried IRC. Does anyone do IRC anymore? Do you experience that the only people that are on there are super rude? Like, you come there to ask questions and they tell you to RTFM first, and then
depends on the channel. I mean, some channels you go to for that experience.
Yeah. I just expected at this point, like, I'm gonna duck my head and ask my question. But okay, yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, okay. You initially said that you can save a lot of time by not writing tests. So can you explain, like, in your experience, what are some of the things that you think are wasteful in writing unit tests or tests in general?
Yeah, I mean, so this is primarily going to be for UI implementation tests, and the biggest value for that is going to be, I think, across testing and supporting features across different versions and across different device types. I mean, as anyone who's done Android know, the fragmentation is terrible, and no matter what you do, there's going to be some device out there that acts really, really strangely. But the tests are nice because you can at least run the first 60% through that if you write them. Or if you're like me and you don't write them, then you just kind of find out as people complain. But I mean, that's one of the first things I'm going to do with the rewrite of Signal Spy that I'm going to do is when I'm done with it, I'm going to write those tests using the Android recorder for the exact purpose of being able to try to weed out those crashes. Now, you can run those tests locally. You can run those tests locally on your own devices. You can run those tests locally on emulators. There's a lot of different options that might be good just for your everyday, like, I just wrote a feature, I want to run these tests. But when you're ready to deploy it, doing something like Test Lab makes a huge difference because the amount of devices that they have, and they charge per minute. So most of the time, it also incents you. A lot of things with Firebase incent you to write things well. So it kind of takes the value of the quickness down a little bit, but as you scale, you might have to go back and redo some things. But if you can write some tests that are fairly good coverage that don't take a long time to run, it would be pretty cost effective. I think I figured to run a typical test suite of the stuff that I have, it might be like $5 for every time I push out a new release or something to run it on like 15 different devices. So I mean, I think it's very valuable, but I think it's hard to write tests. So it's hard for me to write tests. Anything else? Going once? Okay. Please email me if you have questions. Play around with something. Write an app. Send it to me. I'll download it. I'll buy it. I'll do whatever. I really want to see people get the excitement of putting their thoughts out there and seeing people enjoy it. So, all right. Thanks, guys.